The sun was just beginning to climb over the jagged horizon. Casting a pale golden glow across the vast plains, the wind carried a sharp chill that hinted at the coming change of seasons. Rustling the tall grasses and whispering through the scattered mesquite trees, Luke Harper, a rugged cowboy with a reputation for solitude, rode slowly along a narrow trail, scanning the horizon with the practiced eye of someone who had spent countless hours on horseback. He was used to the quiet, the solitude, and the occasional dangers of the untamed land, but nothing could have prepared him for what he was about to find in the shadow of a small copse of trees, partially hidden by a rising mound of earth and tumbleweeds. He saw movement, or rather, the stillness of something out of place at first. He thought it was just a trick of the light, a shadow cast by the early sun, but as he drew closer, the truth became horrifyingly clear. 2 young Apache girls, no older than 10 and 12, were tied to a gnarled tree trunk. Their clothes were torn. Their hair matted and dusted with dirt, they shivered violently. Not just from the cold, but from sheer fear and exhaustion. Their wide, frightened eyes met his from beneath the strands of hair sticking to their faces. Silently pleading for help, Luke's heart clenched. He knew the dangers of the plains, wild animals, harsh weather, and hostile settlers, but leaving the girls here was unthinkable. Whoever had abandoned them had shown no mercy. And it was clear that these children had already endured more hardship than many adults could imagine. The decision was instinctual. He dismounted without hesitation, his boots crunching softly on the frost-hardened earth. His movements were deliberate and slow, ensuring he did not startle them. "Hey there," he said in a low, calm voice, trying to offer some measure of comfort. The girls flinched, but his tone carried the sincerity of someone who had seen too much to offer empty promises. He knelt, loosening the ropes binding their small wrists. They were stiff and chafed, raw from the rough cords, but finally, freedom came as he helped the younger girl to her feet. She pressed herself against him instinctively, clutching at his coat as though it were a shield against the cruel world. The older girl hesitated, eyes scanning the horizon as if expecting more danger to appear at any moment. Luke's steady presence and quiet assurance eventually coaxed her forward. He wrapped them both in his heavy coat, pulling them close to preserve warmth. The wind picked up, cutting sharply against his face, but he barely noticed. His focus was entirely on ensuring they were safe as he led them toward his horse. He noticed subtle signs of exhaustion and trauma, bruises on their arms, raw lips from cold, and the haunted look in their eyes. It was clear that this was not a simple abandonment. The girls had likely been left here with malicious intent. A sense of righteous anger flared within him, tempered by the knowledge that the priority was their immediate survival. Climbing onto the horse with both girls held carefully before him, Luke urged the animal forward. The path back to his homestead would be difficult, and the terrain treacherous, but there was no other choice. Each step was deliberate, balancing speed with caution as he navigated the rolling plains, aware that the storm clouds gathering in the distance could make the journey even more perilous. In that moment, Luke understood something profound. This was not just a rescue. This was a test of courage, compassion, and humanity. These girls, abandoned and vulnerable, had stumbled into the life of a man who had known loss and isolation, and unknowingly, the encounter would not only save their lives, but set the course for a bond that would forever alter the course of all their futures. The discovery of the 2 Apache girls was more than chance. It was fate intertwining their paths, demanding bravery, and setting the stage for a story of survival, trust, and unexpected connection. The ride back to Luke Harper's homestead was tense and quiet. The only sounds, the soft crunch of hooves on frost-hardened ground and the distant whisper of the wind through the prairie grasses. The 2 Apache girls, nestled in his heavy coat, clung silently to each other and to him. Their small bodies trembling from both cold and fear, Luke's jaw was set, his eyes scanning the horizon for danger. But his thoughts were consumed by the delicate lives he had just saved. He knew that the girls had already suffered enough cruelty to harden a lifetime. What they needed now was not just safety, but trust and care. When they reached the edge of his homestead, Luke dismounted carefully. Supporting the girls as they slid from the horse's back, the younger girl collapsed slightly into his arms, unable to stand on her own, while the older one hesitated. Wary of the unfamiliar surroundings, Luke crouched to meet her gaze. Speaking gently, "It's all right, you're safe here, I promise." The cabin, small but sturdy, set among rolling fields bordered by low wooden fences and scattered livestock. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, and the warm light from the windows hinted at the comfort and refuge waiting inside. Luke guided the girls through the door and into the warmth, a stark contrast to the biting cold they had endured outside. Their eyes widened at the fire that crackled in the stone hearth, the wooden furniture, and the cozy blankets folded neatly on the bed. "Sit by the fire," he instructed softly. "I'll get you something warm to drink." He moved quickly, fetching mugs and filling them with steaming herbal tea he kept for long winter nights. The girls sipped cautiously, their small hands cupping the warmth as if it could somehow fill the emptiness left by their ordeal. The younger girl's shivering gradually slowed. Though her wide eyes never left Luke's face, she seemed to sense the safety of his presence. Though the fear she carried was deep and lingering, the older girl, still tense and reserved, hesitated before she lowered herself onto a chair near the fire. Luke gave her time, not pushing, letting her come to terms with the sudden shift from terror to safety. After ensuring they had something to eat, Luke assessed their injuries. Bruises marked their arms and legs, and small cuts were beginning to scab. He gently cleaned and bandaged each one, his hands firm but careful. "I know it hurts," he said quietly, "but it's going to be all right now." He spoke not just to reassure them, but to remind himself of the promise he had made to protect them. As the girls' bodies healed, the first seeds of trust began to sprout. They explored the cabin cautiously, touching objects with awe and curiosity, yet always staying close to Luke. He allowed them the freedom to look around, offering gentle explanations about the simple routines of life on the prairie. His calm demeanor, combined with the predictability of chores and meals, gave the girls a structure they had not known in days, weeks, or perhaps months. Outside, the wind continued to howl, but inside the cabin, warmth, light, and safety created a stark contrast to the harsh world beyond. Luke found himself talking to them, not in the commanding voice he often used with ranch hands, but softly, earnestly, as though speaking to fragile glass he wanted to protect from breaking. He learned their names, little threads of identity that had almost been lost, and discovered that even amidst their trauma, they retained sparks of curiosity and resilience. By nightfall, the girls had begun to settle, curling up in blankets by the fire, their breathing deepening into a calmer rhythm. Luke sat in a chair opposite them, watching over them silently. He understood that saving them was only the first step. The deeper work, earning their trust, helping them heal, and protecting them from a world that had proven cruel, was just beginning. This night marked the true start of their journey. The cabin, once a solitary refuge for a lone cowboy, was now alive with the fragile beginnings of a new family, bound not by blood but by courage, compassion, and the promise of safety. The rescue was complete, but the bond that would define their lives had only just begun. Days turned into a week, and the harsh memory of the girls' abandonment gradually began to fade under the warmth and care of Luke Harper's homestead. The small cabin, once quiet and solitary, now echoed with soft laughter and whispered conversations. The younger girl, timid but curious, began exploring every corner of the cabin, her eyes widening at the simple treasures within handmade quilts, jars of preserved food, and stacks of well-worn books. The older girl, more cautious and reserved, watched carefully from the sidelines, learning slowly to trust the safety of the space and the man who had saved them. Luke spent his days guiding them gently, teaching them the small routines of ranch life. He showed them how to feed the horses, gather eggs from the chicken coop, and even mend a simple fence. The work was physical and tiring, but it gave the girls a sense of purpose and control that had been stripped from them when they were abandoned. For Luke, the act of teaching was more than practical. It was an extension of the care he felt for them. Every smile, every hesitant question, every small victory felt like a balm for their wounded spirits. In the evenings, the three of them would sit near the fireplace. Luke often remained quiet, listening as the girls told fragmented stories of their lives before the tragedy. The older girl spoke cautiously, her words tinged with sadness and fear, describing a life of wandering and hardship. She shared fragments of her cultural heritage, the songs and stories her mother had once taught her, and the small joys they had once known. Luke listened attentively, not only to comfort them, but to understand the depth of their world, their history, and the resilience that had allowed them to survive despite adversity. The younger girl, who spoke less, began to open up through small gestures. A hand held, a shy smile, or a question about the horses grazing outside. Luke responded with patience, recognizing that trust could not be rushed. Through these quiet interactions, an unspoken bond began to form, anchored in safety, respect, and mutual dependence. He learned to read their moods and needs without being told, adjusting his approach when anxiety or fear flared, always mindful of the fragility of their trust. But it wasn't just the girls who were healing. Luke himself found solace in the presence of these two bright, resilient spirits. The solitude he had embraced for years began to feel less like refuge and more like isolation. Their laughter and small acts of curiosity and bravery reminded him of what it meant to care deeply for someone again. He realized that rescuing them had awoken a part of him long dormant, the capacity to love, nurture, and feel connection beyond his own loneliness. Outside, the prairie stretched endlessly, a symbol of freedom and possibility. Luke often took the girls riding across the hills, the wind in their hair and the sun on their faces, showing them that the world could be beautiful and safe despite past horrors. With each ride, with each shared story, and each comforting touch, the barriers between them continued to crumble. The girls began to respond to Luke not as a stranger or just a rescuer, but as a protector, a guide, and someone they could rely on. By the end of the week, small gestures like the older girl resting her head on his shoulder while watching the sunset, or the younger girl holding his hand as she followed him into the barn, became signs of growing trust. Their wounds, though invisible, were slowly closing. The cabin was no longer just a place of safety. It had become a sanctuary of healing, where past trauma was met with patience, understanding, and love. Through these days of quiet connection, Luke, the lone cowboy, and the two girls he rescued began to form an unexpected family. Their lives, once fractured by fear, abandonment, and loneliness, were intertwining in ways that promised not only survival, but hope, belonging, and the first steps toward enduring love in the gentle rhythms of daily life and shared trust. A fragile yet powerful bond had begun to grow, one that would shape all their futures. The morning sun rose softly over the prairie, spilling golden light across the rolling hills and casting long shadows from the ranch buildings. Luke Harper had been tending to the horses when a distant cloud of dust caught his attention. At first, he thought it was a rider passing along the trail, perhaps a neighbor or a trader, but as the figure grew nearer, he realized it was a woman, not just any woman, but a tall, dignified figure with eyes that held both worry and relief. She approached the ranch on horseback, flanked by two young Apache girls who ran ahead, their laughter timid but unmistakably joyful. Luke's heart clenched as he recognized the woman. This was the girl's mother, Her presence brought an immediate, complex mixture of emotions, gratitude, concern, and curiosity. She dismounted gracefully, her clothing simple yet dignified, a few worn belongings strapped to her horse. Her eyes were fixed on Luke, searching, measuring, trying to understand the man who had saved her daughters. The girls ran toward her, shouting in their native tongue, their voices bright with recognition and excitement. Luke stepped forward cautiously. Unsure how the encounter would unfold, the mother's expression was guarded, but she dismounted and approached with slow, deliberate steps. The girls, still catching their breath from the run, clung briefly to her skirts before darting back to Luke, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they had begun to form with him. "I don't know how to thank you," the mother said, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. She looked into Luke's eyes, her gaze unwavering. "You saved my daughters. I feared they would not survive another night alone." Luke simply nodded, his voice low and calm. "They're safe now, that's all that matters." For a moment, the air between them was heavy with unspoken words. The mother then reached into a small leather pouch tied to her waist and pulled out an object wrapped in soft cloth. She held it out to Luke with both hands, her eyes glistening. He took it carefully, unwrapping it to reveal a finely crafted necklace, a traditional Apache artifact, a gift of gratitude and respect. The craftsmanship was exquisite, the symbol on the pendant reflecting protection, family, and resilience. "It's small," she said, "but it carries our thanks and our trust." Her gaze softened. "We owe you more than words can say." Luke felt a lump in his throat. He was no stranger to danger, loss, or hardship, but this moment touched something deep within him, the acknowledgement of his courage, and the warmth of gratitude that was more meaningful than any coin or reward. The gift was not merely an object. It was a bond, a connection to a family he had saved, and an affirmation that his actions had real, lasting impact. The mother then turned her attention to her daughters. Embracing them tightly, the younger girl pressed her face into her mother's chest, and the older one whispered softly in her ear. Luke watched silently, a sense of quiet satisfaction settling over him. He had not just rescued them. He had become an integral part of a family's story, a guardian who had bridged the gap between fear and safety, isolation and belonging. Before leaving, the mother addressed Luke again. "We will stay nearby. You have shown us what it means to protect, to care, and to honor life. We will never forget it." Her words, simple yet profound, resonated deeply within him as she mounted her horse, the girls flanking her. Luke felt an unexpected emptiness, but it was not sorrow. It was a gentle reminder that the lives he had touched were now intertwined with his own. And that trust, once given, was a powerful gift. That day marked a turning point. The mother's arrival, along with her symbolic reward, transformed the relationship. Luke was no longer merely a rescuer. He was recognized as a protector, a friend, and perhaps even a future part of their lives. The gift she had brought was more than a token. It was a bridge of respect and trust, cementing the bond between him and the family he had saved. For Luke it was clear, his life had shifted irreversibly. What had begun as an act of courage had blossomed into connection, responsibility, and the quiet promise of a new chapter, one filled with loyalty, trust, and the beginnings of a family built not by blood, but by heart. The days following the mother's arrival brought a fragile sense of normalcy to Luke Harper's ranch. The two girls settled into routines, laughing as they helped with feeding the animals and learning the rhythms of prairie life. The mother, quiet and graceful, assisted with household chores, her presence a comforting balance to the bustling activity of the children. Yet, outside the safe walls of the cabin, the world remained unforgiving, and not all eyes on the homestead were filled with admiration. Word of the rescue had spread quickly through the nearby town. Whispers followed the family everywhere, rumors, judgmental glances, and subtle warnings from those who distrusted outsiders. Particularly Apache people, some townsfolk admired Luke's courage, but others questioned his motives, his authority, and his wisdom. Why shelter them? Some asked, what business is it of his? Others muttered about the mother and her children. Steeped in prejudice and suspicion, the whispering created tension. Threatening to intrude on the fragile sanctuary Luke had built, Luke, however, had never sought approval. He had acted out of instinct, humanity, and honor. Yet even the strongest of men must navigate the tides of public opinion. And he soon realized that protecting the girls required more than warmth and shelter. It demanded resilience in the face of judgment and a willingness to defend what was right. One afternoon, a group of townsmen rode up to the ranch. Their expressions were stern, filled with skepticism and veiled accusation. "We hear you've taken in these girls," the leader said, dismounting and folding his arms. "People are talking. Some say they were abandoned for a reason. How do we know they're safe, or that you've done the right thing?" Luke remained calm, meeting the man's gaze steadily. "They were in danger. I saved them," he said simply. "I don't need approval from anyone. They needed help, and I gave it. That's all." The tension hung thick in the air, but the mother stepped forward, her posture erect and proud. "They are my daughters," she said firmly, her voice carrying both authority and dignity. "And this man saved them when no one else would. That is enough." Her presence, calm yet resolute, added weight to Luke's words. And for a moment, even the most skeptical townsmen were silenced despite the confrontation. The social challenge was far from over. Luke faced daily scrutiny, subtle slights, and the occasional unkind remark from strangers, but he refused to let it affect the girl's sense of safety. He doubled his efforts to create a home that was welcoming, structured, and protective. Every chore, every meal, every story by the fire became a lesson not just in survival, but in dignity, resilience, and the values of trust and honor. The challenge also tested Luke internally. He confronted his own fears about the world's cruelty, the dangers that had left scars in his heart from past loss. The presence of the mother and her daughters forced him to step outside the narrow confines of isolation he had built around himself. To defend not only them but his own moral code, the ordeal reminded him that courage was not merely an act of physical bravery, but the steady commitment to protect, nurture, and stand firm in the face of doubt and prejudice. Through these trials, a deeper bond formed among the family. The girls grew more confident, the mother more trusting, and Luke more open to the idea of connection. They became a unit, a living testament to the strength found in compassion and the power of human resilience, even as society challenged them. The family discovered that loyalty, love, and unwavering dedication were far stronger than whispers of judgment. By the end of the week, the ranch no longer felt like a simple place of refuge. It had become a fortress of trust, a haven built not only against the physical dangers of the prairie, but against the judgments of the world. The challenge had tested Luke, but it had also solidified the bonds that would sustain them all, proving that courage, love, and honor were the true measure of a life well lived. Prairie dawn broke in soft, golden hues, casting warmth over Luke Harper's homestead, a warmth that seemed to seep into every corner of the small ranch cabin. The trials and hardships of the past weeks, the blizzard, the rescue, the whispers of the townsfolk had gradually given way to a quiet stability. Luke stood on the porch, looking out over the rolling hills and grazing horses, a sense of peace settling over him that he had not felt in years. The two Apache girls were playing nearby, their laughter light and carefree, a stark contrast to the fear that had once haunted their eyes. The mother worked alongside them, a gentle, guiding presence, her gaze occasionally meeting Luke's with gratitude and trust. This was no longer merely a ranch or a home. It had become a sanctuary, a place where wounds could heal and where love, though unconventional and unexpected, could grow the bond between Luke and the family he had rescued had strengthened beyond the practical roles of caretaker and dependent. They were a unit now, knit together by shared trials and mutual respect, a family not bound by blood but by experience, courage, and compassion. Inside the cabin, the hearth crackled as the mother prepared breakfast. The aroma of warm bread and tea filling the air, the girls ran back and forth, delivering small chores with gleeful energy. Proud of the tasks they could accomplish, Luke moved among them with ease, helping to stack firewood, repair fences, and tend to the animals. His hands, once calloused only by solitary labor, now bore the imprint of tender care, guiding, lifting, and comforting the girls with an instinctive grace. The mother approached Luke, holding out the symbolic gift she had given him earlier, a finely crafted pendant representing protection and family. "It's more than a gift," she said softly, her eyes glinting with emotion. "It's a promise that we trust you, and that you are part of our lives now." Luke accepted the pendant, feeling the weight of its meaning. It was a tangible symbol of the bond that had formed, a marker of the family they were becoming together. As the day unfolded, Luke took the girls riding across the expansive prairie. The wind whipped through their hair, carrying away remnants of fear and leaving only exhilaration and freedom. The older girl's laughter rang out as she guided a horse alongside her sister, their trust in Luke evident in the way they followed his instructions and relied on his guidance. Each gallop, each shared smile, solidified the quiet understanding that life could be safe, joyous, and full of connection. Evenings were spent around the fire, a new ritual that brought comfort and intimacy. Stories were shared, not just of the past hardships, but also of hopes, dreams, and lessons learned. Luke, who had once been a man defined by solitude and guarded stoicism, found himself opening his heart in ways he had not anticipated. He listened, he laughed, and he began to dream again, not only for himself, but for the girls and their mother, for the family they were becoming. The townsfolk, who had once whispered and judged, gradually recognized the authenticity of the bond Luke had forged. Respect replaced suspicion as they saw the care, devotion, and stability he provided. The family had transformed not only their own lives, but the perception of the community, demonstrating that courage and compassion could transcend fear and prejudice. As the sun set, casting a golden glow across the prairie, Luke stood on the porch, the girls and their mother beside him. The hardships they had endured, abandonment, danger, isolation, were now behind them. Ahead lay the promise of shared days, laughter, and enduring love. A new chapter had begun, defined not by past pain but by hope, trust, and the quiet power of chosen family. The ranch, once a place of solitude, was now alive with life, belonging, and the joy of connection. Luke had found not just purpose, but home, and in rescuing the girls, he had been rescued in return, gaining a family and a life filled with warmth, love, and the profound satisfaction of hearts reclaimed.